The stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of the general store in Val Verde, Texas, and Deanna Morrison felt her stomach twist with the same uncertainty that had plagued her for the entire journey from Boston. She clutched her worn leather satchel closer to her chest, peering through the dusty window at the sun-bleached buildings lining the main street of this frontier town that would now be her home. The year was 1878, and she had traveled over 2,000 miles to marry a man she had never met, a rancher named Thomas Whitley, who had advertised for a wife in the Boston newspapers. His letters had been polite, practical, promising a comfortable home and respectful treatment. But Diana could not shake the gnawing suspicion that perhaps his intentions were not as honorable as his carefully penned words suggested. The driver opened the door, and the blast of Texas heat hit her like a physical force. Diana stepped down carefully, her dark blue traveling dress already clinging to her skin despite the relatively early hour. She scanned the handful of people gathered near the store, looking for someone who might match the description Thomas had provided. Tall, he had written, with dark hair and broad shoulders from years of ranch work. That description could fit half the men in Val Verde, she thought with a flutter of panic. Miss Morrison. A deep voice drew her attention to a man approaching from the shade of the store's wooden awning. He removed his hat, revealing sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of strong coffee. He was indeed tall, standing well over 6 feet, with dark brown hair that curled slightly at his collar. His face was weathered but handsome, with strong features and a jaw that looked carved from granite. He appeared to be in his late 20s, perhaps 28 or 29, which matched what he had mentioned in his letters. "I am Thomas Whitley. I hope your journey was not too difficult." Deanna curtsied slightly, an automatic gesture from her upbringing that felt oddly formal in this dusty street. "Mr. Whitley, the journey was long but manageable. I am pleased to finally meet you." His eyes swept over her, not in an improper way, but with the assessment of a man evaluating livestock, and Diana felt her spine stiffen. She was 22 years old, educated beyond what most considered necessary for a woman, and had agreed to this arrangement only after her father's death had left her with no income and few prospects. Her aunt in Boston had made it clear that Diana was a burden she could not long support, and so Diana had answered Thomas Whitley's advertisement with a mixture of desperation and resignation. "You are even prettier than your photograph suggested," Thomas said, and though the words should have pleased her, something in his tone felt calculated, rehearsed. "I have arranged for us to be married this afternoon at the church. Reverend Patterson is expecting us at 3 o'clock. That will give you time to freshen up at the hotel and perhaps purchase any necessities you might need for the ceremony." Diana felt her breath catch. This afternoon. She had assumed they would at least have a few days to become acquainted, to move beyond the stilted formality of their correspondence. "So soon? I had thought perhaps we might spend some time in conversation first, to become better acquainted before taking such a serious step." Thomas's expression remained pleasant, but Deanna caught a flash of something in his eyes, impatience perhaps, or annoyance. "I have a ranch to run, Miss Morrison, and I have already spent the better part of a day traveling into town to collect you. I cannot afford to be away from my property for long. We have been corresponding for 3 months. Surely that is acquaintance enough for our purposes." Our purposes. The phrase struck Deanna as cold, transactional. She thought of the letters she had received, always polite but never warm, filled with practical details about his ranch and the duties she would be expected to perform as his wife. He had a 1,000-acre spread 10 miles outside of town. He raised cattle and horses. He employed 3 ranch hands and a woman who came twice a week to help with heavy cleaning. He needed a wife to manage the household, to cook and mend, and eventually bear children to inherit his land. He had laid it all out with the clarity of a business proposal, which Diana supposed was exactly what it was. Of course, Diana said, because what else could she say? She had no money to return to Boston, no family waiting to take her in. She had burned her bridges when she boarded that train, had placed all her hopes on this stranger's promise of a home and security. "I shall be ready at 3 o'clock." Thomas nodded, apparently satisfied. "Good. I will collect you from the hotel at 2:30. The hotel is just there." He gestured to a 2-story building across the street. "Tell the proprietor that Thomas Whitley is covering your expenses. He will see that you have everything you need." He turned to go, and Diana felt a surge of something like panic. "Mr. Whitley, I wonder if you might help me understand what you are looking for in a wife. Your letters were very thorough about the practical arrangements, but I confess I am uncertain about your expectations regarding the more personal aspects of marriage." Thomas turned back, and his expression was unreadable in the harsh sunlight. "I expect you to run my household efficiently, to be a good mother to the children we will have, and to conduct yourself with the propriety expected of a rancher's wife. Beyond that, Miss Morrison, I am a simple man with simple needs. I do not require poetry or romance. I require a partner who can help me build something lasting in this territory." The words should have been reassuring, a promise of stability and purpose, but instead they left Diana feeling hollow. She had not expected grand passion from this arrangement, but she had hoped for at least the possibility of affection, of companionship that went beyond mere utility. Thomas Whitley spoke of marriage as he might speak of buying a new horse or hiring a ranch hand, and Diana wondered what kind of life she had consigned herself to. "I understand," she said quietly, and Thomas nodded once more before striding away toward a hitching post where a large bay gelding waited. Diana watched him mount with easy grace and ride away without a backward glance, and she felt more alone than she had even on the endless train journey from Boston. The hotel proprietor, a round-faced woman named Mrs. Henderson, showed Diana to a small but clean room on the 2nd floor. The woman chattered constantly as she helped Diana bring up her trunk, talking about the weather and the recent cattle drive and the new family that had moved in on the old Patterson spread. Diana listened with half an ear, too tired and too overwhelmed to fully engage. "Thomas Whitley is a good man," Mrs. Henderson said as she straightened the curtains needlessly. "Keeps to himself mostly, but he is fair in his business dealings and he has never caused trouble in town. You could do worse for a husband, especially out here where decent men are scarce." "How long have you known Mr. Whitley?" Diana asked, sitting carefully on the edge of the narrow bed. "Oh, must be 5 years now, maybe 6. He came to Val Verde with money to invest, bought that ranch from old Sam Cooper who was ready to retire back east. Thomas has done well with the place, built it up real nice. Folks say he is one of the most prosperous ranchers in the county." "Is he well liked?" Mrs. Henderson paused in her fussing, considering the question. "Well liked might be too strong a word. Respected, certainly. He pays his debts, treats his hands fairly from what I hear. But he is not what you would call sociable. Does not drink with the boys at the saloon, does not attend the town dances. Some say he is too proud, thinks himself above the rest of us. Others just figure he is dedicated to his work. Hard to say with a man who keeps his own counsel." Diana absorbed this information, trying to reconcile it with the man she had just met. A man who kept himself apart, who viewed marriage as a business arrangement, who could not spare more than a few hours to court the woman who would share his life. She wondered again what had driven him to advertise for a wife rather than courting one of the local women, but she was too weary to pursue the question further. After Mrs. Henderson finally left, Deanna unpacked her trunk and laid out her best dress, a dove gray silk that her mother had made for her years ago. It was somewhat out of fashion now, but it was the finest thing she owned, and she would wear it to her wedding even if the groom did not care whether she wore silk or sackcloth. She washed away the dust of travel in the basin on the washstand, pinned up her honey-colored hair in a simple style, and tried to calm the nervous flutter in her stomach. At precisely 2:30, Thomas knocked on her door. He had changed into a clean white shirt and black vest, and he held a small bouquet of wildflowers that looked somewhat wilted in the heat. "I thought you might like these," he said, offering them with an awkward gesture that was the first hint of uncertainty Deanna had seen from him. "They are lovely, thank you," Deanna said, taking the flowers and wondering if this was his attempt at romance. She pinned a few of the sturdier blooms to her bodice and carried the rest as they walked the short distance to the small church at the end of the main street. Reverend Patterson was a kindly man in his 60s with wire-rimmed spectacles and a gentle manner. His wife served as witness along with Mrs. Henderson, who had apparently invited herself to the ceremony. The service was brief and simple, the traditional words falling over Deanna like a net, binding her to this stranger with promises she hoped they would both keep. When Thomas slipped a plain gold band onto her finger, his hands were steady and warm, and Deanna felt the weight of what she had just done settle over her like a physical thing. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Patterson said with a smile, and Thomas leaned down to press a chaste kiss to Deanna's lips. It was over before she could even process the sensation, and then they were signing the marriage register and accepting congratulations from the few people present. "We should head back to the ranch," Thomas said as they emerged into the late afternoon sunlight. "I have left the hands alone long enough, and there are evening chores to see to." Deanna felt a flicker of irritation at his single-minded focus on his work, even on his wedding day, but she kept her expression neutral. "Of course. I am ready whenever you are." Thomas had brought a wagon for her trunk, and he helped her up onto the bench seat with a courtesy that seemed automatic rather than thoughtful. They drove out of Val Verde in silence, heading west into rolling grassland dotted with mesquite and live oak. The landscape was so different from the green hills of Massachusetts that Deanna felt as though she had traveled to another world entirely. The ranch house came into view as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. It was larger than Deanna had expected, a sturdy two-story structure built of stone and timber with a wide porch that wrapped around three sides. There were several outbuildings visible, a large barn, corrals, and a bunkhouse for the ranch hands. It was a prosperous operation, exactly as Thomas had described in his letters, and Deanna felt some of her anxiety ease. At least she would not be living in poverty. Thomas helped her down from the wagon and carried her trunk up to the porch. "I will show you to your room. You can settle in while I tend to some business in the barn. Supper is usually at 6. I assume you can manage to prepare something simple." Deanna blinked at him, processing the fact that he expected her to cook her own wedding supper. "Yes, I can manage. Where is the kitchen?" "Through the main room at the back of the house. The larder is well stocked. My housekeeper, Mrs. Garcia, was here yesterday to prepare for your arrival." He opened the front door and led her into a spacious room furnished with simple but well-made furniture. Everything was clean and orderly, almost austere in its lack of decoration. Thomas carried her trunk up the stairs and down a short hallway to a bedroom that looked out over the back of the property. Deanna stepped into the room and froze. There was only one bed, a large four-poster that dominated the space. Of course, there was only one bed. She was his wife now. But somehow seeing it made the reality of her situation feel overwhelming. Thomas set down her trunk and turned to face her. "I know this is not what you might have imagined for your wedding day. I am not a man given to romantic gestures or flowery speeches. But I want you to know that I will provide for you and protect you to the best of my ability. I will never raise a hand to you in anger, and I will treat you with the respect due to my wife. In return, I expect you to manage my household and fulfill your duties as we discussed in our correspondence. Is that acceptable to you?" Deanna met his eyes, those dark, unreadable eyes, and wondered what lay behind them. "It will have to be, will it not? We are married now." Something flickered across Thomas's face, but it was gone before Deanna could identify it. "I will let you settle in. Take whatever time you need before starting supper." He left, closing the door quietly behind him, and Deanna sank down onto the edge of the bed. Her wedding day. She was a married woman now, bound for life to a man who spoke of their union with all the warmth one might bring to discussing the price of cattle. She allowed herself exactly 5 minutes to feel the full weight of her loneliness and uncertainty, and then she stood, smoothed her dress, and went downstairs to find the kitchen. The kitchen was large and well-equipped, with a cast-iron stove, a sturdy work table, and shelves lined with supplies. Deanna found flour, bacon, eggs, potatoes, and canned vegetables. She set about making biscuits and frying bacon, peeling potatoes to fry alongside it. The familiar rhythms of cooking soothed her somewhat, giving her hands something to do and her mind a reprieve from the worries that threatened to overwhelm her. Thomas came in precisely at 6 o'clock, washed up at the pump by the back door, and sat down at the kitchen table without comment. Deanna served the simple meal and sat across from him, acutely aware of every sound in the quiet room. The scrape of his fork against the plate seemed unnaturally loud. "This is good," Thomas said after several minutes of silence. "You are a capable cook." "Thank you. My mother taught me." She believed a woman should be able to run a household efficiently. A practical woman. I wish I could have met her. She died when I was 16. Influenza took her in less than a week. Thomas looked up from his plate, and for the first time Deanna saw something like genuine sympathy in his expression. "I am sorry. My mother died when I was young as well, cholera. My father raised me and my brother on his own. You have a brother? You never mentioned him in your letters." Thomas's expression shuddered again, becoming that blank mask he seemed to wear habitually. "We are not close. He went his own way years ago. I have not heard from him in some time." Deanna wanted to ask more, to understand this man she had married, but something in his posture told her the subject was closed. They finished the meal in silence, and Thomas helped her clear the dishes, which surprised her. "You do not need to help with the washing up," Deanna said. "Surely that is my responsibility. I have been doing for myself for years. I am not so proud that I cannot carry a few dishes." He pumped water into the wash basin and stood beside her as she washed and he dried, and the simple domesticity of the act gave Deanna a small flicker of hope. Perhaps Thomas Whitley was not quite as cold and calculating as he seemed. Perhaps beneath his practical exterior there was a man capable of warmth. But when the dishes were done and the kitchen set to rights, Thomas announced that he had paperwork to attend to in his study and would be working for a few more hours. "You should retire whenever you wish," he said. "You must be exhausted from your journey. I will try not to disturb you when I come up." Deanna nodded, too confused to know what to say. Was he giving her space? Or was he simply uninterested in claiming his marital rights on their wedding night? She climbed the stairs to the bedroom. changed into her nightgown, and slipped between sheets that smelled of lavender and sunlight. She lay awake for a long time, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch settling for the night, wondering what her life would be like in this place, with this stranger who was now her husband. Thomas did eventually come to bed, moving quietly in the darkness as he undressed. He lay down beside her, keeping a careful distance, and within minutes his breathing had deepened into sleep. Deanna lay beside him, acutely aware of his presence, of the warmth radiating from his body, of the strangeness of sharing a bed with a man for the first time in her life. It was hours before she finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. The days that followed fell into a pattern. Deanna rose early to prepare breakfast for Thomas and the ranch hands. She met the three men who worked for her husband. Jorge, a weathered Mexican man in his 50s who had been with the ranch since before Thomas bought it. Sam, a young man barely 20 who reminded Deanna of an eager puppy. And Robert, a quiet man of about 30 who spoke little but worked hard. They were polite to Deanna, calling her Madam and thanking her for the meals she provided, but they seemed to take their cues from Thomas, who treated her with unfailing courtesy and complete emotional distance. After breakfast, Thomas would disappear to work on the ranch, often not returning until the evening meal. Deanna spent her days learning the rhythms of the household, organizing the kitchen and larder to her liking, mending clothes, and trying to combat the dust that seemed to infiltrate every corner of the house despite her best efforts. Mrs. Garcia came on Tuesdays and Fridays to help with the heavier work, and she was a cheerful woman who chattered in a mixture of English and Spanish that Deanna found oddly comforting. Thomas continued to be scrupulously polite. He thanked her for meals, complimented her cooking, and occasionally asked if she needed anything from town. But he never touched her beyond the necessary courtesies of helping her up into the wagon or moving past her in the narrow hallway. He never sought her opinion on ranch matters, never shared his thoughts or feelings, never indicated in any way that she was anything more than a housekeeper he happened to have married. 3 weeks into her marriage, Diana's frustration finally boiled over. Thomas had just announced at breakfast that he would be away for 3 days, helping a neighboring rancher move cattle to new grazing land. He stated this as a simple fact. No discussion, no asking if Deanna would be comfortable alone in the ranch house with only the hands nearby. "Do you ever intend to treat me as a wife rather than a servant?" The words escaped before Deanna could stop them, and she saw Thomas's hand freeze halfway to his coffee cup. The 3 ranch hands suddenly became very interested in their plates, and the kitchen fell silent except for the ticking of the clock on the mantel. "What is that supposed to mean?" Thomas asked, his voice level but with an edge Deanna had not heard before. "It means that you married me for practical purposes. I understand that. But you do not speak to me. You do not confide in me. You do not include me in any decisions about the household that is supposedly mine to run. You come and go as you please without discussion. You treat me with less familiarity than you treat your horse." Thomas set down his coffee cup very carefully. "Jorge, Sam, Robert, you are excused." The 3 men scrambled up from the table and fled out the back door with obvious relief. Deanna lifted her chin, refusing to be cowed by Thomas's darkening expression. "I have provided for you exactly as I promised," Thomas said quietly, but there was heat beneath the words. "You have a comfortable home, plenty of food, nice clothes. You want for nothing material. What more do you expect from me?" "I expect to be treated as a person, not as a piece of property. You speak more words to your ranch hands than you do to me. You have never once asked me about my thoughts, my feelings, my life before I came here. You have never shared anything of yourself beyond the bare facts necessary for running this ranch. You have not even touched me as a husband should touch his wife." Diana felt her face flame as soon as the last words left her mouth, but she refused to look away from Thomas's shocked expression. "I was trying to give you time," Thomas said, and for the first time Diana heard real emotion in his voice, confusion and hurt threading through the words. "I thought you would appreciate not being rushed. I thought you would prefer to become comfortable before I made demands of you." "Demands? Is that how you think of it? Thomas, we have been married for 3 weeks. I know you do not love me, I did not expect that. But I thought that perhaps we might at least develop some kind of friendship, some kind of partnership. Instead, I feel like a ghost in my own home, invisible unless you need a meal prepared or a shirt mended." Thomas stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. "I am not a man who knows how to speak pretty words or play at courtship. I told you that from the beginning. If that is what you were hoping for, you should have married someone else." "I had no one else to marry. I came here because I had no other choice, because I was alone and desperate and you offered security. But I did not realize that security would come at the cost of living like a stranger in my own marriage." They stared at each other across the table, and Diana saw something break in Thomas's expression, some wall cracking to reveal a glimpse of the man beneath. "What do you want from me?" he asked, and he sounded genuinely bewildered, as though the question of what a wife might want beyond material provision had never occurred to him. "I want conversation. I want to know about your day, and I want you to care about mine. I want to understand what you think and feel. I want you to see me as more than just another ranch asset that you acquired." Thomas was silent for a long moment, his jaw working as though he were chewing over words he did not know how to say. Finally, he spoke. "I will try. I cannot promise to be different than I am, but I will try to be more attentive to your needs. Is that acceptable?" It was not exactly the passionate declaration Diana might have hoped for, but it was more than he had given her before. She nodded. "That is all I ask. And Thomas, you do not need to ask permission to touch me. I am your wife. I understand what that means." Something flashed in Thomas's eyes, but he simply nodded. "I need to check on the horses before I leave. I will see you at supper." He left, and Diana sank back into her chair, feeling drained and uncertain whether she had made things better or worse. But at least she had spoken her mind, had asserted that she was more than a silent shadow in Thomas Whitley's well-ordered life. That evening, Thomas returned to the house earlier than usual. He washed up and came to the kitchen where Diana was preparing fried chicken and greens. "Can I help with anything?" he asked, the question clearly unfamiliar on his tongue. Diana glanced at him in surprise. "You could set the table if you like." Thomas nodded and began laying out plates and utensils with the same precise care he seemed to bring to everything he did. When they sat down to eat, he cleared his throat awkwardly. "Tell me about Boston. What was your life like there?" It was the first personal question he had asked her, and Diana felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. She told him about the boarding house where she had lived with her aunt, about the church where she had played piano on Sundays, about the lending library where she had spent hours lost in books. Thomas listened, really listened, asking occasional questions that showed he was genuinely interested. In turn, Diana learned that Thomas had grown up in Missouri, that his father had been a carpenter who taught Thomas the value of hard work and careful planning. His mother's death when he was 8 had devastated his father, who had thrown himself into work and expected his sons to do the same. Thomas's younger brother had rebelled against their father's rigid expectations, running away at 16 to join up with a group of drovers heading to California. Thomas had stayed, learned his father's trade, saved every penny he could. When his father died of a heart attack when Thomas was 24, he had sold everything and come to Texas to buy land and build something of his own. "Why did you not court a local woman?" Deanna asked, emboldened by the most substantial conversation they had yet had. Surely there were women in Val Verde who would have been pleased to marry a prosperous rancher. Thomas was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "I did not want someone who knew me or thought they knew me. I did not want to have to live up to expectations or pretend to be something I am not. With you, I thought it could be simple, a straightforward arrangement where we both understood the terms. But marriage is not simple, Thomas. It is two people trying to build a life together, with all the complications and messiness that entails. You cannot reduce it to a business contract, no matter how much you might want to." "I am starting to understand that," Thomas said quietly, meeting her eyes. "I thought I had everything figured out. I thought if I provided well and treated you fairly, that would be enough. I did not consider that you might want more than that you might want me." The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest, and Deanna felt her heart beat faster. "I do want you to want me, Thomas, not just as a housekeeper or a future mother for your children, but as a person you chose to share your life with." Thomas reached across the table, his rough, calloused hand covering hers. It was the first time he had touched her voluntarily, and the warmth of his skin sent a shiver through Deanna. "I will do better, I promise you that." From that night forward, things began to change. Thomas made an effort to come back to the house for the midday meal, spending an hour talking with Deanna about the ranch operations, asking her opinion on household matters, sharing stories from his day. Deanna found herself looking forward to these conversations, watching for Thomas's rare smiles, learning to read the subtle shifts in his expression that betrayed his feelings. One afternoon, about a week after their argument, Deanna was in the vegetable garden behind the house, trying to coax some life out of the tomato plants that Mrs. Garcia had planted before Diana's arrival. The Texas sun beat down mercilessly, and Deanna had shed her bonnet in frustration, knowing she would freckle but too hot to care. "You will burn." Deanna looked up to find Thomas standing at the edge of the garden, holding a wide-brimmed hat. He came forward and settled it on her head, his fingers brushing against her temple as he adjusted it. The gesture was so unexpected, so tender, that Deanna felt tears prick at her eyes. "Thank you," she managed. "Mrs. Garcia says you should water in the early morning before the sun gets too hot. The plants will take it better. I will remember that." Deanna looked up at him, this tall, reserved man who was trying so hard to bridge the gap between them. "Thomas, why did your brother leave? You said he went his own way, but there is more to it than that, is there not?" Thomas's expression tightened, and for a moment Deanna thought he would retreat behind his walls again. But then he sighed and sat down on the edge of the garden bed, apparently unconcerned about the dirt. "My brother James was always different from me. Where I was cautious and planned everything, he was impulsive and wild. Our father was hard on both of us after our mother died, but he was especially hard on James because he could not understand a son who did not want to follow in his footsteps. They fought constantly. When James left, our father said good riddance, said he was glad to be rid of a worthless son who would never amount to anything. But you did not feel that way. James was my little brother. I loved him, even when he drove me to distraction. I tried to write to him after our father died, to let him know he could come home, that there was inheritance money waiting for him. But my letters came back undeliverable. I do not know if he is alive or dead, successful or struggling. I do not know if he ever thinks of me." Deanna reached out and took Thomas's hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I am sure he does. Brothers do not forget each other, no matter how much distance lies between them. Thomas looked at their joined hands, and when he looked back up at Diana, his eyes were bright with emotion. "I am not good at this, at letting people in. My father taught me that showing emotion was weakness, that a man stands on his own and does not burden others with his feelings. But I am trying, Diana. I want you to know that." "I know," Diana whispered, "and I see the effort you are making. It means more to me than you might think." They sat together in the garden as the sun tracked across the sky, hands joined, and Diana felt the first real stirrings of hope that perhaps this marriage might become something more than a convenient arrangement. The following Sunday, Thomas surprised Diana by asking if she would like to attend church in Val Verde. They rode into town in the wagon, and Diana noticed that Thomas sat a little closer to her than he had on previous trips, his thigh occasionally brushing against hers as the wagon bounced over the rough road. At church, Thomas introduced Diana to people she had not met, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. She met other ranch wives, women who welcomed her warmly and invited her to join their quilting circle. After the service, Thomas lingered in conversation with some of the other ranchers, and Diana was pleased to see him include her in the discussions, explaining aspects of ranch management and asking if she had opinions on various matters. On the ride back to the ranch, Diana felt lighter than she had since arriving in Texas. "Thank you for today. It was nice to meet the neighbors and feel like part of the community. I should have thought to do it sooner. I am too accustomed to keeping to myself." "Why do you do that?" "Keep to yourself, I mean. The other ranchers seem to respect you. I think they would welcome your friendship if you offered it." Thomas was silent for a while, guiding the horses around a washout in the road. "When I first came to Val Verde, I was an outsider with money to invest. Some of the established ranchers resented me, thought I was trying to buy my way into something I had not earned. I learned to keep my head down and focus on my work. It became a habit. But surely that was years ago. You have proven yourself by now. Habits are hard to break. And I suppose I learned from my father that it is safer not to let people too close. They cannot disappoint you if you do not have expectations of them." Diana thought of her own loneliness after her father's death, of the coldness of her aunt's house, where she had been made to feel like a burden. "I understand that more than you might think, but loneliness is a high price to pay for safety." Thomas glanced at her, and something in his expression shifted. "Yes, I am beginning to understand that." That night, after they had retired to their bedroom, Thomas reached for Diana for the first time. His touch was tentative, questioning, and Diana responded by moving into his arms. Their first kiss was awkward, both of them uncertain, but when they pulled apart, Thomas was smiling in a way Diana had never seen before. "I have wanted to do that since the day you arrived," he admitted, "but I did not know how to bridge the distance between us." "You are doing it now," Diana said, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw. "That is what matters." They made love that night with tenderness and care, and afterward Thomas held Diana close, his arms wrapped around her as though he feared she might disappear. "I am not good with words," he murmured into her hair, "but I want you to know that I am glad you are here. Glad you took a chance on a stranger who did not deserve your faith." "You are not a stranger anymore," Diana replied, pressing a kiss to his chest. "You are my husband, and I am starting to believe that might be a very good thing." The weeks that followed were a revelation. Thomas began teaching Diana to ride, putting her on a gentle mare named Daisy and leading her around the corral until she gained confidence. They rode out together across the ranch lands, and Thomas showed Diana the boundaries of his property, the creek that ran along the eastern edge, the bluff that overlooked the valley where his cattle grazed. He spoke about his dreams for the ranch, his plans to build up the herd and maybe one day breed horses as well as cattle. Diana shared her own dreams, talking about the school she had always wanted to teach at, her love of music and books. Thomas listened intently, and one day he surprised her by bringing home a piano from Val Verde, a slightly battered upright that he had arranged to have shipped from San Antonio. "I know it is not new," he said, as Jorge and Sam helped maneuver it into the parlor. "But the storekeeper said it is well made and should hold its tune. I thought you might like to have music in the house." Diana threw her arms around Thomas's neck, not caring that the ranch hands were watching with amused grins. "It is perfect, thank you." She played that evening after supper, simple hymns and folk songs, and Thomas sat in the chair by the fire, listening with an expression of such contentment that Diana felt her heart swell. This was what she had hoped for, this sense of building a life together, of two people learning to fit their lives around each other. As summer deepened into fall, Diana noticed changes in herself as well. She was stronger from the physical work of running the household, her skin golden from hours in the garden. She had learned to can vegetables, to churn butter, to bake bread in the temperamental oven. She could ride well enough to accompany Thomas on shorter trips around the ranch, and she had made friends among the neighboring ranch wives. But more than the practical changes, Diana felt herself becoming more confident, more certain of her place in Thomas's life. He no longer treated her as a fragile city woman who might break under the harsh realities of frontier life. He asked her opinion on important decisions, trusted her judgment, shared his worries and his hopes. And Diana, in turn, had learned to read the subtle language of Thomas's expressions, to understand when he needed space and when he needed comfort. One evening in late October, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the hills, Thomas took Diana's hand. "I need to tell you something," he said, and there was a seriousness in his tone that made Diana's heart skip. "What is it? When I sent for a mail-order bride, I thought I knew exactly what I wanted. A practical woman who could manage a household and would not expect romantic nonsense from me. I thought I could keep my heart separate from the arrangement, that I could maintain the same distance I have maintained from everyone else in my life." He paused, his thumb rubbing circles on the back of her hand. "But you have made that impossible. You have worked your way into my heart without me even realizing it was happening. I love you, Diana, not because you cook well or manage the household efficiently, but because you are brave and smart and beautiful, and you refuse to accept the half-life I was offering you." Diana felt tears spill down her cheeks. "I love you too. I think I started falling for you when you brought me that ridiculous hat in the garden, when I realized that, beneath your practical exterior, was a man who cared, who noticed, who wanted to protect and cherish me even if he did not know how to say it." Thomas pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that no longer surprised her. "I am still learning how to be a good husband," he murmured against her lips. "But I promise you, Diana, I will spend the rest of my life trying to be the man you deserve." Winter brought cold winds that swept down from the north, and Diana learned to navigate the challenges of keeping a household warm and fed when snow occasionally dusted the ground. She and Thomas developed routines and rituals that bound them together. Thomas would wake her with coffee and kisses. They would eat breakfast together before he headed out to work, and in the evenings they would sit by the fire, Diana reading aloud while Thomas mended tack or worked on ranch accounts. Christmas approached, and Diana wanted to mark the occasion in a special way. She baked for days, filling the house with the scents of cinnamon and ginger. She made presents for the ranch hands, warm scarves she had knitted during the long evenings. For Thomas, she embroidered a handkerchief with his initials, a small thing but made with love. Thomas surprised her on Christmas morning with a package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a beautiful shawl, soft wool in a deep blue that matched her eyes. "I ordered it from a catalog," Thomas admitted. "The storekeeper helped me pick the color. I am not good at choosing such things." Deanna wrapped the shawl around her shoulders, touched by the thought he had put into the gift. "It is beautiful. I love it." They spent Christmas Day quietly, just the two of them, and Deanna thought about how different her life was from what she had imagined when she stepped off that stagecoach in Val Verde. She had expected security but found love. She had feared cold practicality but discovered a man capable of deep feeling, even if he struggled to express it. In January, Diana realized she was pregnant. She felt the familiar absence of her monthly courses and the odd queasiness that struck her at unexpected moments. She waited to be certain before telling Thomas, both excited and nervous about how he would react. One evening, as they sat at the kitchen table after supper, Deanna reached across and took Thomas's hand. "I have something to tell you. I am expecting a baby." Thomas stared at her for a long moment, and Deanna watched emotions chase across his face. Shock, joy, fear, wonder. Then he stood and pulled her to her feet, holding her carefully as though she might break. "A baby," he breathed. "We are going to have a baby." "Yes. Sometime in late summer, I think." Thomas kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "This is the best news you could have given me. I promise you, Deanna, our child will grow up knowing he is loved. I will not be the kind of father mine was. I will not be distant or cold. I will show our children every day how much they mean to me." "I know you will," Deanna said, holding him close. "You have already proven that you can change, that you can open your heart. You will be a wonderful father." The pregnancy was not easy. Deanna suffered from sickness that lasted well into her 4th month, and the Texas heat in July and August made her uncomfortable and short-tempered. But Thomas was endlessly patient, bringing her cool water, rubbing her aching back, taking over more of the household tasks when she was too tired to manage them. Mrs. Garcia became an invaluable help, coming almost daily as Deanna's time drew near. The older woman shared wisdom passed down through generations about pregnancy and childbirth, and Deanna was grateful for her calm presence. On a sweltering August night, Deanna's labor began. Thomas rode into town to fetch the doctor while Mrs. Garcia stayed with Deanna, coaching her through the contractions. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next morning. Thomas paced outside the bedroom door, and Deanna could hear his boots on the wooden floor between her contractions. A reminder that he was there, waiting and worrying. Finally, as the sun climbed high in the sky, Deanna delivered a healthy baby boy. The doctor placed the squalling infant in her arms, and Deanna felt a love so fierce and immediate that it took her breath away. Thomas was allowed in, and he approached the bed with an expression of such wonder that Deanna felt tears stream down her face. "Look at him," she whispered. "Look at our son." Thomas reached out with a trembling hand to touch the baby's downy head. "He is perfect, Deanna. He is absolutely perfect." They named him Matthew Thomas Whitley, and he became the center of their world. Thomas proved to be a devoted father, rising in the night to bring Matthew to Deanna for feedings, walking the floor with him when he was fussy, singing off key lullabies that made Deanna smile. As Matthew grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Thomas's careful management and hard work paid off, and they were able to hire more hands and expand their operations. But despite the demands on his time, Thomas never forgot the lessons he had learned. He made time for his family, teaching Matthew to ride almost before the boy could walk, reading to him every night, showing him the same patient attention he showed Deanna. Diana resumed teaching piano, giving lessons to children from town on Saturday afternoons. Thomas had the bunkhouse enlarged to accommodate the extra hands, and he built Diana a proper music room where she could teach and practice without disrupting the household. 2 years after Matthew's birth, Diana gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah. She had Diana's honey-colored hair and Thomas's dark eyes, and she was a bright, curious child who kept them all on their toes. Thomas adored her, and Diana often found him in the nursery, holding Sarah while she slept, a look of complete contentment on his face. Life was not without its challenges. There were hard years when drought threatened the cattle, and years when illness swept through the herd. There were injuries, close calls that reminded Diana how dangerous ranch work could be. But they faced everything together, Thomas and Diana, partners in the truest sense of the word. On their 5th anniversary, Thomas took Diana into town for dinner at the hotel restaurant, leaving the children with Mrs. Garcia. It was a rare evening out, just the two of them, and Diana treasured the opportunity to talk without interruption. "You remember the day you arrived in Val Verde?" Thomas asked as they lingered over coffee. "I was so nervous. I had no idea how to talk to you, what to say to make you want to stay. I remember thinking you were the coldest man I had ever met," Diana admitted with a smile. "I was convinced you had only married me because you needed a housekeeper and it was cheaper than hiring one." Thomas winced. "I deserved that. I was a fool, Diana. I almost ruined the best thing that ever happened to me because I was too stubborn and afraid to open my heart. But you learned. We both learned. That is what marriage is, I think. Two people constantly learning how to love each other better." Thomas reached across the table and took her hand, the gesture as natural now as breathing. "I thank God every day that you did not give up on me. That you fought for us even when I did not know enough to fight for myself. I could never give up on you, Thomas. You are my home. Not this place, not Texas, but you. Wherever you are, that is where I belong." They walked back to the wagon under a sky full of stars, and Thomas pulled Diana close, kissing her with the familiar passion that had only deepened over the years. As they drove back to the ranch, Diana thought about the frightened woman who had stepped off the stagecoach 5 years ago, uncertain and alone. That woman had doubted Thomas's intentions, had questioned whether she had made a terrible mistake. But Thomas had shown her, through patient actions more than words, that his intentions were honorable, that his heart was true even if he struggled to express it. He had wooed her not with flowery speeches or grand gestures, but with small daily acts of love. A hat to protect her from the sun. A piano to bring music into their home. His willingness to change, to open himself to vulnerability and connection. His steady presence through pregnancy and childbirth, and the exhausting early days of parenthood. His commitment to being the husband and father he had promised to be. Diana had learned to see love not in declarations but in actions. In the way Thomas brought her coffee every morning, in how he listened when she spoke, in his patience with their children, in the way he still looked at her across a crowded room as though she were the only person in the world. The years continued to pass, marked by the growth of their children and the changing seasons on the ranch. Matthew grew tall and serious like his father, though with more of his mother's warmth. He showed an aptitude for ranching, following Thomas around and asking endless questions about cattle and horses and land management. Sarah was bright and musical, showing an early talent for the piano that delighted Diana. When Matthew was 8 and Sarah 6, Diana gave birth to another son, whom they named James after Thomas's lost brother. The naming was emotional for Thomas, a way of honoring the brother he still missed even after all these years. One afternoon, when James was about 6 months old, a stranger rode up to the ranch. Thomas was out checking fence lines, and Deanna answered the door with the baby on her hip and Sarah peeking out from behind her skirts. The man was dusty from travel, younger than Thomas, but with similar features. Dark hair, strong jaw, the same set to his shoulders. He removed his hat and smiled uncertainly. "I am looking for Thomas Whitley. I was told in town that this is his ranch." Something in Diana's chest tightened. "Yes, this is Thomas's ranch. May I ask who is calling?" "My name is James Whitley." "I am his brother." Deanna felt shock ripple through her. The lost brother, the one Thomas had mourned for years, was standing on their porch. "Please come in. Thomas is out on the ranch, but I can send someone to find him. I am Deanna, Thomas's wife." James stepped inside, his eyes taking in the comfortable home, the signs of prosperity and family. "He married. I am glad. I always worried that Thomas would end up alone, too stubborn to let anyone close." Deanna smiled despite her shock. "He was certainly stubborn when I first met him. But he learned. Please sit down. Tell me where you have been all these years." James sat at the kitchen table, and Deanna poured coffee while he told his story. He had worked as a drover, then a ranch hand in California, saving money and learning the business. He had married a woman named Mary, but she had died in childbirth along with their daughter 2 years ago. James had been adrift since then, finally deciding to find his brother and try to mend the rift that had separated them for so long. "I was angry for a long time," James admitted. "Angry at our father for being so hard, angry at Thomas for being the perfect son while I could never measure up. But time and loss have a way of putting things in perspective. Thomas was just trying to survive our father's expectations the same as I was. He did not deserve my resentment." Deanna reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Thomas will be so happy to see you. He has thought of you often over the years. He even named our youngest son after you." James's eyes widened. "He did?" "Yes. You meant more to him than you might have realized." Deanna sent Jorge to find Thomas, and she watched from the porch as Thomas rode in an hour later. She saw the moment he recognized his brother, saw him pull his horse to a stop and just stare for a long moment. Then he was swinging down from the saddle and striding toward the porch, and James was meeting him halfway, and the two brothers were embracing. Years of separation and hurt melting away in that moment. Deanna gave them time alone, keeping the children occupied in the house while Thomas and James walked and talked, making their peace with the past. When they finally came inside for supper, Thomas's eyes were red-rimmed, but his smile was genuine. "James is going to stay with us for a while," Thomas announced. "We have a lot of catching up to do." James stayed for 3 months, becoming part of the family. He helped with ranch work and played with the children, and slowly the wounds of the past healed. Thomas was different with his brother, more open and expressive, as though James's presence had unlocked something in him. Eventually, James announced that he planned to head to San Antonio, where he had heard of opportunities for experienced ranch hands. But before he left, he pulled Deanna aside. "Thank you for taking care of my brother. When I knew him before, he was closed off, afraid to feel anything. But you have changed him. He is happy now in a way I never thought he could be." "He changed himself," Deanna corrected gently. "I just gave him a reason to try." After James left with promises to write and visit, Thomas held Deanna close in their bed. "I never thought I would see him again," Thomas murmured. "I thought I had lost him forever, the way I lost my mother and father, but he came back. And it is because of you, because you gave me the courage to believe that people can change, that broken things can be mended." "I love you," Deanna said simply, because sometimes the simplest words were the truest. "I love you too, more than I ever thought I could love anyone." The years continued their steady march. Matthew grew into a young man who reminded Deanna so much of Thomas at that age, serious and hardworking, but with a warmth that his father had only learned later in life. Sarah became an accomplished pianist, giving recitals in town that drew crowds from the neighboring ranches. Young James was adventurous and bold, always getting into mischief, but impossible to stay angry at for long. Thomas's brother visited regularly, eventually remarrying a widow from San Antonio and bringing her to meet the family. The brothers remained close, their early estrangement a distant memory. Deanna and Thomas grew older together, silver threading through their hair, lines deepening around their eyes. But their love deepened too, maturing into something solid and enduring. They knew each other's rhythms and moods, could communicate with a glance across a room, had built a life together that was richer than either had imagined possible. On their 25th anniversary, their children threw them a celebration at the ranch. The house was full of friends and neighbors, children and grandchildren. Matthew had married a sweet girl from town and had given them 2 grandsons. Sarah was engaged to a doctor from San Antonio. Young James, now a young man himself, was talking about starting his own ranch with his father's help. As Deanna stood on the porch watching the festivities, Thomas came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about? About how far we have come. About that scared woman who stepped off the stagecoach 25 years ago, convinced she had made a terrible mistake. And had you?" Diana turned in his arms, looking up at the man she loved with her whole heart. "It was the best decision I ever made. You showed me what love really means, Thomas. Not pretty words or grand gestures, but steady devotion, patient effort, the willingness to change and grow. You showed me through your actions that you loved me, long before you could say the words." Thomas kissed her, long and slow, not caring who might be watching. "You taught me that it is safe to love, that opening my heart was not weakness but strength. You taught me that I did not have to face life alone, that partnership and vulnerability could make me stronger rather than weaker." They stood together watching the sun set over the ranch. Their children and grandchildren gathered around them, the fruit of a love that had started with doubt and suspicion, but had grown into something beautiful and lasting. Deanna thought of all the years ahead, however many they might be blessed with, and she knew they would face them together, as they had faced everything else. As darkness fell and lanterns were lit around the yard, Matthew called everyone together for a toast. He raised his glass and looked at his parents with obvious affection. "To my parents, who showed me what true partnership looks like, who taught me that love is not just a feeling but a choice you make every day, who built something lasting not just in this ranch but in our family. May we all be as blessed in love as they have been." Everyone cheered and drank, and Deanna felt Thomas's hand tighten around hers. She looked up at him, this man who had started as a stranger, who had seemed so cold and distant, who had revealed himself to be capable of such depth of feeling and devotion. "I would choose you again," she whispered. "If I had to do it all over, I would choose you 1,000 times." "And I would choose you," Thomas replied. "Every single time." The party continued late into the night, filled with music and laughter and the warmth of family. But eventually the guests departed. The children returned to their own homes, and Thomas and Deanna were left alone in the house that had been the setting for their love story. They climbed the stairs to the bedroom they had shared for 25 years, and as Thomas helped Deanna with the buttons of her dress, she thought about all the nights they had shared, all the intimacy and trust they had built over the years. "You remember our wedding night?" Deanna asked as they slipped into bed. "How you were so careful not to disturb me, how we lay there like strangers," Thomas chuckled, pulling her close against his side in the familiar position they had slept in for years. I was terrified of you. You were so beautiful and refined, and I was just a rough rancher who did not know how to talk to a lady. And now you are still beautiful, but you are also my best friend, my partner, the mother of my children, the keeper of my heart. You know all my flaws and love me anyway. I am not afraid of you anymore, Deanna. I am just grateful for you." Deanna pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his steadily beating heart. "As I am grateful for you. You gave me a home when I was lost, a family when I was alone, and a love I never dared to hope for." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, content in the knowledge that they had built something real and lasting, that their love had weathered the tests of time and grown stronger for it. The years that followed were gentler, the pace of life slowing as Thomas gradually handed over more responsibility to Matthew. They became the wise elders of the family, the ones grandchildren came to for stories and advice, the anchors around which family celebrations revolved. Thomas never did become a man of flowery words or grand romantic gestures, but he continued to show his love in 1,000 small ways. He still brought Deanna coffee every morning, still made sure she had everything she needed before he left for his daily ride around the property, still listened when she talked as though her words were the most important thing in the world. And Deanna continued to love him with the same fierce devotion she had felt since the day she realized that, beneath his practical exterior, beat a heart capable of great love. She played piano for him in the evenings, read to him when his eyes grew tired, massaged his aching joints after long days of work, reminded him every day that he was loved and valued. When Deanna was 60 and Thomas 65, they sat on the porch one evening watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Matthew's boys were growing tall and strong, Sarah's daughters were learning piano from their grandmother, and young James's children were running wild with all the energy of youth. "We did well," Thomas said quietly, reaching for Deanna's hand. "Look at what we built together." Deanna laced her fingers through his, these familiar hands that had held hers for over 3 decades. "Yes, we did very well indeed. You ever regret it? Leaving Boston, marrying a stranger, building a life in such a hard place?" Deanna thought about the question seriously, as she always did when Thomas asked something important. "There were hard times, times when I was lonely or scared or overwhelmed. But regret? Never. This life with you has been richer and more meaningful than anything I could have had back east. You gave me purpose and love and a family. What more could I ask for?" Thomas lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles in the gallant gesture that still made her heart flutter. "I was a fool when we married. I thought I could keep you at a distance, keep my heart safe. But you refused to let me hide. You pushed and challenged me until I had no choice but to love you. And what a wonderful thing that turned out to be," Deanna said with a smile. As the sun set over the Texas hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple, Deanna reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had started as a mail-order bride who doubted the intentions of the cold, practical man who had sent for her. But Thomas had shown her, through patient actions and steady devotion, that his intentions were honorable, that his heart was true, that love could grow even in the hardest soil if tended with care. Their love story had not been filled with dramatic declarations or sweep you off your feet romance. Instead, it had been built on a foundation of daily kindness, mutual respect, and the willingness to be vulnerable with each other. It had been forged in shared work and common goals, in laughter and tears, in the raising of children and the building of a life together. And in the end, Deanna thought, that was the truest kind of romance. Not the fleeting passion of youth, but the deep, abiding love that came from truly knowing another person and choosing them every day in small ways and large through all the seasons of life. As darkness fell and the grandchildren were called inside, Thomas helped Deanna to her feet. They walked into their home, their hands still clasped, ready to face whatever years remained to them with the same partnership that had sustained them for so long. Their love story had begun with doubt, but had been transformed by action, by a cowboy who learned to show his heart, and a woman who had the courage to demand more than practicality from her marriage. And it would endure, a testament to the power of love to change lives and build something beautiful from the simplest beginnings. The end of their story was not an ending at all, but rather a continuation of the life they had built together, a life that would ripple outward through their children and grandchildren, carrying forward the lessons of love and partnership that Thomas and Diana had learned together in their years in Val Verde, Texas, in the Wild West that had tested them and shaped them and ultimately given them everything they had ever needed.